Texas highways aren't just roads, sometimes they're gateways. What I experienced one night on a remote stretch of road wasn't just fear, it was something that shouldn't exist. Every mile I drove, reality twisted, shadows moved, and something followed. This is the true story of the most terrifying night of my life, and how one highway in Texas almost swallowed me whole. Before starting today's video, tell us in the comments where are you watching from and what time is it there so we know from which state people are watching from. I've been driving highways across Texas for almost a decade now, mostly long-haul deliveries, but nothing had prepared me for that night. It was late October, the kind of night where the wind carries a strange chill even though the thermometer says it's mild. I was on Highway 287, heading north toward Amarillo from Fort Worth, a stretch I'd driven countless times, so I should have felt comfortable. But there was something different that night, a heaviness in the air I couldn't explain. The day had been normal, traffic, deliveries, and fuel stops, but as the sun dipped below the horizon, the landscape began to shift. The fields turned dark, silhouettes of trees looming against the fading light, and the occasional farmhouse sat quietly, windows unlit, like forgotten eyes watching me pass. My rig hummed steadily beneath me, tires rolling over asphalt, radio playing softly in the background. That's when I first noticed it. A figure, standing on the shoulder ahead, a man in tattered clothes, waving as if trying to flag me down. I slowed, instincts telling me to approach cautiously. As I drew closer, I realized something was off. The man's face was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes. I couldn't make them out clearly, they were just dark voids that seemed to swallow the dim light. He raised a hand, motioning for me to stop. My first thought was he was drunk or maybe someone hitchhiking, but Texas has no shortage of weird encounters, and I'd seen my share. I shook my head, slowed slightly, and rolled my window down. "Need help?" I called out. The man didn't respond. Just kept staring. His lips moved, but I couldn't hear anything. The wind carried nothing but the low hum of my engine and the faint rustle of the fields. That's when I saw it, his feet didn't touch the ground. He was hovering a few inches above the asphalt, swaying slightly, as if the wind beneath him held him up. My pulse jumped. I slammed the accelerator, the tires spinning over the worn pavement as I passed him. Glancing in the mirror, I expected him to fade into the night like a trick of the light. Instead, he was gone. Vanished. And yet, the air felt heavier, like the truck itself carried the memory of him. I told myself it was my mind playing tricks. Fatigue, stress, long hours on the road, anything to explain it. I kept driving, but the unease grew. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, and the darkness pressed in from the sides. Headlights pierced the blackness, but the edges of my vision seemed to shift, shadows flitting in ways that didn't match the trees or road signs. That's when the radio crackled. Static at first, a low hum that made my teeth tingle. Then, a whisper, faint but clear, echoed through the cabin. "Don't stop." I jerked, my hand tightening on the wheel. The voice was low, distorted, and seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I scanned the road, the empty fields, my mirrors. Nothing. I told myself to ignore it, that it was the radio acting up. But the voice came again, slightly louder, more urgent. "Keep driving." I didn't know whether to be terrified or angry. The voice didn't belong to anyone I recognized, it was guttural, unnatural, almost like it had been stretched between life and death. I tried turning the radio off. Nothing. I unplugged it. Still, the whisper remained, faint but insistent, threading through the cabin as if the walls themselves were speaking. A mile down the road, the first real sign of danger appeared. Up ahead, a truck sat in the middle of my lane, headlights on, engine idling. I swerved instinctively, heart hammering, tires scraping the shoulder. As I slowed, I realized the truck was empty. No driver, no movement inside, nothing but a phantom glow from the dashboard lights. I thought about calling dispatch, but my phone had no signal. It had gone dead somewhere after the first encounter. I radioed a nearby trucker channel, hoping someone else was near. Static answered me, but no human voice. Only that whisper returned, carrying over the channel now. Stop, or join them. I froze, the words sinking like ice in my chest. Join them? My rational mind screamed no, but the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, was palpable. I pressed my foot harder, maneuvering around the phantom truck, and I swear I felt eyes on me from the tree lean, shadows sliding closer, keeping pace with my rig. For the next hour, the highway became a corridor of terror. Every distant light in the fields wasn't what it seemed. Farmhouses that should have been abandoned glowed faintly, windows flickering, curtains moving when there was no wind. Figures darted in the periphery, glimpses of people standing in the dark, vanishing when I looked directly. One time, a child ran across the road, only to disappear mid-step, leaving no sound, no trace, no reflection in my mirrors. By the time I reached a service station near Wichita Falls, I was shaking. The lights inside offered little comfort. Patrons moved like normal people, oblivious, while I sat in my rig, gripping the wheel, feeling the echo of the highway chase still vibrating through the metal and glass. The whisper had stopped, but I couldn't shake the sensation that someone, or something, was still outside, waiting for me to continue. I left the highway only when daylight broke. Even then, I kept glancing at the fields and tree lean, half expecting the figures to be following. Nothing moved in the sun's light, but I knew it was just the pause before nightfall, before whatever haunted that stretch came alive again. That night, in a motel off the highway, I couldn't sleep. Every shadow in the room seemed elongated, stretching toward me. Every wind gust against the window sounded like a footstep. And I understood, deep in my bones, that the Texas highway I'd driven so many times was not just a road. It was a corridor between the living and something else entirely, a place where travelers could vanish, or worse, be claimed by the whispers and shadows that haunted its stretches. I haven't driven that highway since. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see those lights, that phantom truck, and the hovering man waving in the dark, and I remember the whisper that promised, very clearly, that it could happen again. And I know it could. I didn't sleep at all that night in the motel. Every sound, the creak of the old air conditioning, the hum of the fridge, even the distant rumble of cars on the nearby frontage road, felt amplified, like the world outside was aware I'd survived the highway. I kept thinking about the hovering man, the empty truck, the whispers. Sleep was impossible. My hands itched to grip the wheel, to return to the rig, as if the highway itself had called me back. By the time the sun began to climb over the horizon, I was exhausted, but I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that this was far from over. By late morning, I forced myself to get back on the road. This time I chose Highway 82, cutting east toward Wichita Falls, hoping the daylight and change of scenery would give me some sense of normalcy. The first hour was uneventful, the stretch of highway lined with tall pecan trees and old farmhouses. The fields glimmered under the bright Texas sun, and for a moment, I allowed myself to believe that the nightmare had ended. But then the shadows started. Not the usual dark patches under trees or the long angles of morning sunlight, but shadows that moved on their own, stretching, bending, twisting. I caught glimpses of figures, just silhouettes, flitting along the tree lean, never fully revealing themselves. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks, fatigue making the daylight seem strange. But the more I drove, the more obvious it became that these were not tricks. The shadows didn't belong to anything visible, no animals, no cars, no humans. About 90 minutes in, I approached a long, narrow bridge over a dry creek bed. The bridge was old, rusted, the metal grating squeaking faintly under the tires. I slowed down as I crossed, but that's when I saw them. Faces, dozens of faces, pressed against the concrete sides of the bridge. Pale, hollow-eyed, mouths open in silent screams. I slammed my foot on the accelerator, my heart hammering. I didn't glance back, but the sensation of being watched followed me for miles after. The radio began acting up again. Static at first, then that whisper, faint but chilling. Turn back, or stay forever. I gripped the wheel tighter, ignoring it, forcing myself to focus on the road. But then I noticed the headlights behind me. Not just another car, but a single, intense beam that seemed impossibly bright. It didn't fade in distance, it stayed locked on me. No matter how fast I drove, it remained. The road curved, I swerved to avoid stray deer, and still the light stayed, unwavering. Panic set in. My pulse raced, my hands trembling. I was no longer driving, I was fleeing something ancient, relentless. Highway 82 eventually merged into smaller county roads, winding through scrubland and past abandoned gas stations. That's when I first saw the figures in full. Shadowy, humanoid shapes standing in the middle of the road, not moving, not reacting to my horn, just watching as I passed. One even stepped into my lane briefly, only to vanish when I blinked. I slammed my brakes and skidded to the shoulder, heart thundering. The road was empty. Completely empty. Nothing but dust kicked up by the wind. By mid-afternoon, the sky darkened unnaturally. Thick clouds rolled in, blotting out the sun, and the air turned heavy and cold. I stopped at a lone diner, the kind that sits miles from anything, with peeling paint and a neon sign that buzzed intermittently. Inside, the patrons were few, a man at the counter staring into his coffee, a waitress wiping down tables, but something was wrong. The shadows in the corners of the room stretched too far, and reflections in the windows didn't match the positions of anyone inside. I sat, ordering black coffee, hands still shaking, trying to convince myself this was just stress. When I left the diner, it was already near sunset. I had to take Highway 183 north, a long, lonely stretch through open plains and oil fields. The trucks here are few, and I felt exposed, vulnerable. The moment I hit that stretch, the whispers returned, louder this time, echoing in the cabin, no matter how I turned off the radio. Not far, not far, not far. I caught glimpses in my mirrors, vehicles appearing and disappearing in the distance, headlights flaring then vanishing entirely. One truck passed me briefly, a huge 18-wheeler, but when I looked, the driver's seat was empty. No one at the wheel. I slammed my brakes, barely controlling the rig, my stomach turning. Hours passed in that stretch, the darkness deepening as night fell. I realized the highway itself was changing, the familiar markers, mileposts, signs, they began to twist, stretch, and appear in impossible positions. Distances seemed to warp. A turn I knew should have appeared after 3 miles stretched to 10. The road seemed alive, shifting subtly beneath my tires. I could swear it narrowed slightly when I focused ahead, then widened when I glanced away. I drove for what felt like eternity, the only light from my rig cutting weakly into the black. That's when I saw it, a figure standing at the edge of the road, waving me toward an old, abandoned rest stop. I didn't recognize the highway there. My instinct screamed not to stop, but the figure's gesture was insistently beckoning. I passed it without slowing, my heart racing, when I realized it wasn't just one figure. Dozens of them lined the shoulders, crouching, standing, all featureless, their faces obscured in darkness. They moved with me as I drove, keeping pace, never blinking, never breaking formation. By midnight, I reached a stretch lined with wind turbines, their massive blades slicing through the dark sky. One blade seemed to flicker, but when I blinked, it wasn't spinning, it was leaning toward me, impossibly close. My rig felt trapped in a corridor, the turbines forming invisible walls that forced me forward. The shadows and whispers merged, a low chorus chanting in my mind, urging me, warning me, cursing me. I remember thinking I might not survive this highway. I remembered the hovering man, the phantom truck, the faces on the bridge, and the empty diner. All connected now, threads of terror tying these stretches of road together, forming a tapestry of something beyond comprehension. I kept driving, miles stretching into hours, until the first signs of dawn appeared on the horizon. The shadows receded, the whispers faded, the highway straightened. I finally reached a real town, with real people, lights, and the mundane sounds of morning. My body was shaking, hands raw from gripping the wheel, eyes wide from exhaustion. But even in daylight, the feeling lingered, that something had followed me, something that watched, waiting for the darkness to return. I parked the rig at the truck stop, took a long shower, and sat with a coffee, trying to rationalize what had happened. But I knew, deep down, that no rational explanation existed. Texas highways are long, remote, and on some stretches, they are not meant for the living to travel alone at night. Whatever I encountered that night, it didn't belong to this world. And I suspect it still waits, patient, for the next traveler. I stayed parked at that truck stop longer than I needed to. Even after the sun was fully up, even after the place filled with regular noise, air brakes hissing, engine starting, people laughing, I couldn't shake the feeling that leaving would put me right back into whatever nightmare I'd escaped. I told myself daylight had broken whatever hold that highway had on me. I wanted to believe that. By mid-morning, I finally pulled back onto the road. I chose Interstate 20 heading west, thinking a major highway would be safer. More traffic. More exits. More reality. For a while, it worked. The sky was clear, the land stretched flat and familiar, and other vehicles passed me regularly. I started to convince myself that the previous night had been a perfect storm of exhaustion, fear, and imagination. That confidence didn't last. Somewhere west of Abilene, I noticed something wrong with the traffic pattern. Cars passed me, but they never stayed ahead. Every vehicle that overtook me eventually disappeared, not turning off, not exiting, just gone. When I checked my mirrors, the road behind me was always empty. No matter how long I drove, I was alone in both directions. I sped up to test it. 10 minutes later, a sedan passed on my left. I watched it carefully. It didn't drift. It didn't slow. It simply faded, like someone had slowly erased it from the road. That was when the temperature inside the cab dropped. Not gradually. Instantly. My breath fogged the windshield even though the heater was running. The dashboard lights dimmed slightly, then returned to normal. I felt pressure in my ears, the same feeling you get when descending too fast in an airplane. And then the smell returned. Cold asphalt. Burnt oil. Something metallic and old. The radio crackled back to life on its own. No static this time. Just breathing. Slow. Close. As if someone was sitting directly behind my seat. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. My hands locked on the wheel, knuckles white, every muscle in my body screaming at me not to acknowledge it. The breathing synced with mine. In, out, in, out. I whispered, barely audible, "You're not real." The breathing stopped. Then a voice spoke. Not whispered. Not distorted. Calm. Familiar. You already know that doesn't matter. The road ahead blurred for a moment, like heat waves rising off pavement, except the air was cold. The horizon bent downward slightly, the highway dipping into something darker, something wrong. Mile markers became unreadable, their numbers smeared and warped. I passed the same billboard 3 times in 10 minutes, a faded advertisement for a town that didn't exist anymore. I checked my GPS. No signal. No map. Just a blank grid and one message blinking in red. Recalculating. I tried to exit. The ramp appeared suddenly, sharp and narrow, leading away from the interstate into scrubland. I took it without thinking, desperate to get off the main road. The moment my tires left the interstate, the world changed. The sky darkened like someone had turned down a dimmer switch. The land flattened unnaturally, no hills, no fences, no signs of life. The road narrowed until it barely fit my rig, cracked pavement crawling with weeds that bent toward me as I passed. I realized then that I wasn't lost. I'd been redirected. The road led to an abandoned service area, rusted pumps, shattered windows, a canopy sagging under its own weight. I didn't want to stop, but the engine began to sputter. The dashboard lit up with warnings I'd never seen before. Oil pressure dropped. Battery fluctuated. The truck died. Complete silence followed. No wind. No insects. No distant traffic. Just me, sitting in a dead truck, in a place that didn't feel like it existed on any map. I stepped out cautiously. The air felt thick, almost resistant, like moving through water. My footsteps sounded wrong, too loud, echoing in a way open space shouldn't allow. I walked toward the building, flashlight in hand, heart pounding. That's when I noticed the other trucks. At least 6 of them. Parked in perfect alignment behind the building. All different companies. Different years. Different conditions. All empty. Their doors hung open. Cab lights flickered faintly, despite dead batteries. Inside one of them, I saw a jacket hanging from the seat. Mine. Same rip on the sleeve. Same stain near the cuff. I backed away slowly. The whisper returned, but now it wasn't just one voice. It was many. Overlapping. Murmuring. Familiar tones layered together, drivers, dispatchers, strangers, even my own voice repeating things I'd said years ago on different highways. Pulled over to rest. Just needed fuel. Thought it was safe. I ran back toward my truck. The road behind me was gone. Not faded. Not dark. Gone. Where asphalt should have been was flat dirt stretching into darkness, the outline of the road barely visible like a scar. The building behind me creaked. Something moved inside. Heavy footsteps. Slow. Confident. I climbed back into the cab, slammed the door, and twisted the key. Nothing. Again. Nothing. The breathing returned, this time from the passenger seat. I didn't look. You can stay, the voice said gently. Everyone else did. The windshield filled with reflections that weren't mine. Faces pressed against the glass, some terrified, some calm, some empty. I recognized one of them. The man hovering on the shoulder from the first night. He smiled. The engine roared to life without warning. The truck lurched forward, tearing through dirt, through shadow, through whatever boundary had been holding me there. The world snapped back into place violently, like reality correcting itself. I was back on the interstate. Traffic surrounded me. Sunlight poured through the windshield. I screamed without realizing it. I didn't stop driving until I crossed into another county. I didn't sleep that day. Or the next. I turned in my resignation a week later. Sold the truck. Changed my route, my job, my habits. But it didn't end there. Sometimes, when I drive at night on any Texas highway, I see exits that shouldn't exist. Service stations that vanish when I look again. And occasionally, when the radio is off and the cab is quiet, I hear breathing that matches mine perfectly. Whatever lives on those roads doesn't belong to one stretch of highway. It follows. And it waits for you to be alone long enough to listen. So guys, that's it for today's story. If this video gave you chills, make sure to subscribe to House of Horrors. New horror stories every day. And yeah, sleep safe tonight.